Hi everyone, welcome to Ask Bucky Unfiltered. This is a webcast that seeks to bring relative information to our campus. My name is Janan. I'm one of the special project interns at Campus and Visitor Relations, or CAVR, and I will be our host today. In this webcast, we'll be discussing off-campus housing, which is very fitting for us since the campus area housing fair is next Wednesday. And students are also beginning to think about where they might think about their housing for the next academic year. I am excited to welcome a variety of different off-campus housing offices to the webcast today so they can all share the resources that they have for students. So today we have Luke from Tenant Resource Center, Abby from LZ Management, and Alex and Joe from Campus Area Housing. Before we dive into questions, why don't all of you just take a second to introduce yourself and the office you work with?
Sure, I can start. Hi, my name is Luke Seberg, and I am a program director for tenant services with the Tenant Resource Center. We're a nonprofit located here in Madison. Our main offices are on Williamson Street over on the Near East Side, and we do also, in non-COVID times, have a physical presence on campus on the third floor of the Student Activity Center. And sort of broad overview of what Tenant Resource Center does. We provide information about rental rights to folks that are in some way, shape, or form involved in rental housing. So that means tenants, that means occasionally landlords, and then also case managers or just folks that are in some way, shape, or form working in the rental housing realm.
Hi everyone, my name is Joe Bierman. I'm the coordinator for campus area housing at Uw-Madison. Our campus area housing office is the official resource for off-campus housing affiliated with the university. We work directly with property managers, as well as we help students find and provide resources to students about living off campus, how to navigate searching for housing. We also have a website that has our advertising listing service, which is campusareahousing.wisc.edu. And then we also host and hold the housing fair, the fall housing fair each year. This year, that'll be Wednesday, October 21st from 11 to 4 p.m. It'll be held virtually on our website, which is campusareahousing.wisc.edu.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex. I also work with Campus Area Housing. I'm a off-campus housing specialist. So I'm also a student here, so I'm a junior. And yeah, so our office, as Joe said, we serve as kind of as a liaison between students, community members, and then also property managers in the area. So yeah.
Cool, and I'm Abby, and thanks so much for having me. I'm here representing LZ Management. I am the sales and marketing coordinator over there. You guys might not know what LZ Management is, but you probably know Grand Central and XO1. Those are our two campus properties that we manage. I also went to UW-Madison. I graduated in 2016, and I lived in XO1 and other buildings on campus, so I know a lot about how things go when it comes to leasing.
Well, that's great. I'm excited to have all your expertise here today. So I first want to start off by asking if you're talking to someone who is about to sign a lease for the first time, what information would you share with them? And Luke, do we want to start with you?
Sure, I can kick it off. So when we talk to somebody who's signing, whether it's their first lease or their third lease or their 100th lease, I guess that third one doesn't really happen too often, but you never know. What we like to tell folks kind of right off the bat is to take their time and really, really read through every single line of that agreement. It's not like when you get an update from on your iPhone or something like that, and it's like, do you agree to the terms and conditions? And I don't know about you all, but I have never read one of those, and I probably never will. With a lease agreement, you really want to make sure that you know exactly what you're getting yourself into, because unlike some other types of legal contracts, there's no back out period or grace period or anything along those lines. So once you've put pen to paper and signed on the dotted line, you are bound to a legal contract, and particularly for students, you're bound to a legal contract with probably some other people, unless you're fortunate enough to be on a lease agreement by yourself. So what that means is that you're joint and severally liable in most cases, which means that if your roommate later on down the line decides to stop paying rent, your landlord could, in theory, go after you for that unpaid rent. So again, kind of the most basic thing is you're getting yourself into a legal contract, and for many students, it's going to be the first, contract of that kind that they've signed as an adult. So just being really cognizant of the kind of the gravity of that situation is probably the first and most important thing I like to tell folks about. And I'll let everybody else talk, but I can probably go on for an hour straight about lease agreements, but we don't need that.
I can jump in next. Ultimately, what Luke said, read the lease very, very intricately, very carefully to know what is in there. Also know that the advertisement that you saw for it, make sure that maybe what was included in that ad or what you discussed as you were viewing the property is included in that lease. So simple things like, is parking included or not? Is there, you may want to more in depth know about the pet policy, if there is one, if there's not. Also to utilities, know what you would be responsible for, what the landlord is going to be responsible for, and make sure all those conversations that you had and those things those details that you were told are indicated there in that lease.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a good point. I know when I was first looking at leases, trying to understand like what utilities really cover, because some places utilities includes water and electricity. Some places utilities is just, the water, and then you're also responsible for electricity on the side. So I think that's a good point, Joe.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to kind of bounce off that, especially what Luke was saying about those joint leases. You really, really, really want to make sure you talk with the property management staff of whatever building you're going to be living at, because everyone has different leases. Some properties do individual leases, some do joint separately liable. I can tell you at LZ Management, we've always done joint separately liable leases, and we've never had an issue with people not paying rent. Because we require something called a cosigner for pretty much all students that live there. What a cosigner is, typically it's a parent or a family member who basically says, hey, if my daughter doesn't pay her rent, I will pay her rent. It's kind of a liability blanket there. So that's another thing to know, is that you might be required to get a cosigner. And then the other thing that I would also want to reiterate is the security deposit. So I'm pretty sure all properties require a security deposit to be due at some point between the lease getting signed and you moving in. Leases, it depends on how much the security deposit is. It'll be either half a month's rent or a month's rent usually. What that is, a security deposit is, okay, the landlords, you'll pay it to them. They will hold on to it for the duration of your lease. Once you move out, they will go into your unit and check to see if any damage is there. So I highly, highly recommend taking a video of your units immediately when you move in and right before you move out, just in case there's any issues. I can tell you last year, LZ Management gave back 97% of security deposits. Because we don't charge for things like little nail holes and normal wear and tear. But that's something I would absolutely want to talk about with the property management staff, of how much security deposit do people usually get back? What are things that they normally get charged for, etc. So.
Yeah, and I do want to mention that, so on our website, which is campusareahousing.wisc.edu, we do have a rental resource guide. So I was recently trying to find an apartment, and I used it because it has information about what to do when you're touring a place. So it has information like make sure to bring a phone charger to see if the electric sockets work, and flushing the toilets and stuff like that. Like, that wouldn't be obvious to me or a lot of other people. And then it includes like average monthly rental prices per, are you living in a 1-bedroom, 5-bedroom, It also just has a lot of resources, and it mentions definitely the Tenant Resource Center and LZ Management, our partnership with them. So yeah, that's a huge resource just to, if you need something written out for you, definitely helps.
Yeah, so kind of going off of that, Alex, I thought you brought up a cool resource I personally didn't know about at Campus Area Housing. But I wanted to ask, like, what resource do each of your offices provide that you would say that most students don't know about, and if you were a student, you would wish to know about?
I would say, well, definitely the rental resource guide. Also, especially with the current situation, our office has been keeping a list of apartments in the area that are student friendly and that have availability. So we do keep a list on us. So it's been very handy for students and parents who call us, and they may not necessarily know that we have it, but yeah.
Going off of that as well, I think most students know with with our campus area housing website, we have a listing service that has available rentals on there. But going off that, there's a number of just on that website as a whole, like further resources too. Alex mentioned our rental resource guide. There's also a tab that discusses a little bit more renters education that our website provider and vendor has put together for us there, that just has some quick videos that are a little bit, they're somewhat high level, but they give some pretty important information about leasing, about searching for rentals, especially if it's your first apartment or if it's your fifth apartment. No matter what year in school that you are. Students can also come to our office or email us or via phone. They can reach out to us and set up a time for us to talk through with them the intricacies of searching for housing, to be reminded of what plans to have in place, to see if they have their plans solidified for their timing of looking for housing. It's a really big thing. Right now, there is a lot of information coming in that there's a lot of need to right now sign a lease. And if you have your plans set and you're very comfortable in your plans for next fall, then you can have an early start in looking. But really, we do encourage that students take their time to know that their plans are solidified. So if you're just thinking of the idea of studying abroad, maybe not this coming spring, but the following spring, that's something that you want to know about when you're searching for a rental, because as mentioned, once you are signing that lease, you are accountable for that lease during that full duration. So just having your plans in place and knowing that although you may be getting a lot of information right now about maybe it seems like there might be limited availabilities or such in places that you may be considering, just know that there's housing available. Whether you're making a decision right now because your plans are set, or if you're waiting a few more months deciding what is going on, there is housing available that would meet your needs. Maybe a little bit way further down the road, maybe you won't get your priority of amenities. Maybe your location or the amenities of your certain location might not be 100% of everything that you wanted, but there are availabilities that will be available throughout the academic year.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you bring up, Joe, too, and something we haven't talked about yet, but is like the idea of subleases, which I think from perusing the campus area housing website, I know you all help out with if people are looking for someone to sublease from them, or from people who want to get a sublease, but the idea of either taking over a lease from someone else or just partially taking it for a certain amount of time. Do you have any advice about subleasing or anything like that?
I can jump in, or Luke, if you want to go first, that's fine.
No, go ahead, Abby, and I'll follow afterwards.
Sure. So I'm really glad you brought up study abroad. That's something we hear all the time during leasing. So when it comes to signing a lease, in the state of Wisconsin, that is a legally binding contractual document. That means you are financially responsible for that unit for the duration of your lease, in addition to you're responsible for any damages done to the unit. So when people have something like a study abroad situation come up, they pretty much have three options. One is the least desirable, in my opinion, which is just keep paying your rent even though you're not living there. I think that everyone would agree that kind of sucks. So your other two choices are re-renting the unit or subletting. So re-renting basically means you're going to find, let's just say it's just you in your apartment for now to make it a little simpler. If it's just you, what happens is you would move out. You would find someone else to completely re-sign a brand new lease and take over for you. The downside to breaching your lease, that's another word we use for it. The downside is until we have another signature of a new tenant, you are still responsible for that unit. LZ management and all management companies are supposed to help you market those units. So I would talk to your property management staff about that, what they do for you. And then as far as subletting goes, I would say that's the one that's much more common. So subletting would be like, let's say, like when I lived at XO1, I lived with 5 girls. So if one of us did study abroad. So what happened was she found someone who basically took her spot for 1 semester. With that, she negotiated with that person because they didn't pay the full sublet rents. That's something to know, is that if you're subletting, sometimes you won't get that full amount that you're paying. But what happened then was she studied abroad and then the new tenant moved in. Everything was fine. The one thing to be extra cautious about with subletting, though, is that you are still liable for damages that the subletter might incur. So that's just something to be wary about. You probably want to find a subletter that you can trust rather than just someone off the street. And also, if you live with roommates, you will need the roommates to all sign off on an agreement saying that that person is fine to come live with them. So, Luke, please fill in the gaps for me.
Sure, of course. Yeah, all that stuff is 100% accurate, and I agree with everything you said, Allie. The couple things I'd want to add specifically around subletting are that there can be a tricky situation can develop where a tenant does not inform their landlord that they are going to sublet their unit, and they do sort of an under the table deal with their buddy who throws them $300 a month, and that person's living there too, and maybe their roommates aren't too jazzed about having an extra roommate all of a sudden, which can kind of create this rat's nest of who's actually responsible for the rent, what happens if that subletter causes damage to the unit, something along those lines. So the dividing line for me, like at a very basic level, what you want to be aware of is that if you've got a term lease that's for a year or longer, Wisconsin state law does say that you need the explicit consent of your landlord to sublease. So the majority of lease agreements that students sign, I think it's accurate to say, are those types of leases. The alternative is a month-to-month lease where you don't have a term, you're just paying rent monthly. Less common for students, but it's definitely a thing in some instances. For month-to-month lease agreements, you do not need to get the written consent of your landlord to sublease unless in your lease agreement it says that you need to get written consent to sublease. And for what it's worth, most landlords, whether they have term lease agreements or month-to-month lease agreements, will include language in their lease that makes it pretty clear that, hey, if you want to sublet, you got to run it by me and you got to get the okay from me before doing so. So kind of back to where it gets confusing. Well, it's all kind of confusing, but specifically, you can get into a situation where someone has an illegal sublet. It's illegal per the terms of the lease agreement, but they've accepted money from the person that they're subletting to for a month, 2 months, 3 months. They have still established a tenancy. So that subletter is still entitled to tenant rights, even though the person who they are subletting from is violating their lease agreement. So it creates this kind of complicated legal scenario that usually ends up in one or both of the tenants losing their housing or having to find alternative housing in a really short period of time, which is kind of the result that none of us want. So that's something to be aware of, is that if your landlord says no, you can't sublet, it's probably best to listen to your landlord in that regard. And then, of course, kind of to echo what Abby said, the other thing just to really keep in mind is that with subleasing, if you're on a lease with more than one person, you need to get the consent of everybody on the lease agreement as well as the landlord in order to get that ball rolling. I talk to students sometimes who really want to sublet their unit because maybe it's just two people and they have had a falling out with their roommate, and their roommate is just refusing to agree to any potential replacement. And unfortunately, that's one of the risks you take when you enter into a lease agreement with somebody, is that you're in this contract together, and under the eyes of the law, you need each other's permission to kind of do a lot of things related to that lease agreement. So again, kind of back to what we were talking about at the beginning, be very, take your time when picking your roommate. It's a lot.
Yeah, so Luke, a question for you. What are the most common ways, I guess, you've worked with UW students in the past, and do you have any other general tips when it comes to accommodating how, I guess, students can work with their housing management to make sure they're all on the same page?
I would say, so the technical term for the work that we do at Tenant Resource Center is housing counseling. So we're counseling people about housing. So that's the kind of the bread and butter of what the agency has done for the past 40 years. So usually my interactions with students are, student calls us or comes into the campus area office and says, hey, I live in, the Humbucker apartments, or I live at the Lux, or, or I live off campus, or, wherever. I want to move out, or I want my landlord to fix the leaky pipe, or I think it's really cold in my unit. My landlord controls the heat. What do I do? So we walk them through what their rights are, how they can best advocate for themselves, and kind of go from there. And sorry, can you repeat the second half of your question? I lost track of it for a second there.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered it well, but like the idea of how to make sure students have kind of clear communication with their housing management so they're all on the same page.
Gotcha. I would say number one most important thing any tenant can do, student or non-student, is get it in writing. We always recommend, if you have a conversation with a manager or a staff person, if you can have that conversation over email. That way, if there's any disagreement about what happened over the course of the conversation, you've got a paper trail that either party can point to and say, well, this is actually what I said. I didn't say I'd let you out of your lease, immediately. I said, we'll try to find someone to take over your lease agreement as soon as we can. That's a different thing. If you have a phone call with either another tenant, a landlord, property manager, and there's some sort of conversation where you reached a conclusion, or a disagreement was resolved, send a follow-up email, just sort of summarizing the conversation to the best of your memory. Hey, dear landlord, on Wednesday, October 14th at 3:30 p.m., we discussed you repairing the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom, and you told me that you were going to try to have your guy out there by Saturday at the latest. Just wanted to make sure that that's how you remembered the conversation going. If you have any other questions, please let me know. So that way the landlord can then email back and say, hey, great, sounds good, we'll be there. Or something came up, my guy's got family emergency, it'll be done by Tuesday instead. So again, there's that written record. That's probably the single most important thing. Like if I got a tenant landlord tattoo, it would say get it in writing, which would be kind of funny because that itself would be in writing as well.
Awesome. Alex, I'm going to pop it over to you. So you mentioned earlier that you're a current student on campus. So I just wanted to hear more about like how has your experience been working with campus area housing, and how has that kind of helped you make more informed decisions about finding housing and going about that in Madison?
Yeah, so I actually found I live in a studio, so I found that through the campus area housing website, which is super nice because I run the website a lot of the time. And on our website, there were a lot of filters. So I have a cat with me, so I put that as one of the filters. I knew to make sure to like check the rental resource guide when I was touring, took a video when I moved in, as Abby pointed out, and just it's not like hard stuff. It's more stuff that if you weren't told it, you wouldn't think about it. So I just made sure to use that. I made like a list of the things I needed to do, and I made sure to be in contact like with my property managers when I moved in. For mine, they had a sheet where I put in anything that was broken or chipped right away, and then so you're not liable for it if it comes up later.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of good information there. And then Abby, as you also mentioned that you actually graduated from UW. So now looking back at your time as being a student at UW, what is one thing you would have done differently in terms of housing?
So in terms of housing, something I would have done differently, I did not realize, so I lived in the dorms my freshman year, and then I moved into XO1. And when I moved out of XO1, I didn't realize that I didn't realize that all apartments weren't run the same way. I was pretty naive at the time. And to Alex's point, all of this stuff is not like you should just know it. There's no way you would know all of this. Write an email when you talk to your landlord, which is great advice, by the way. Unless you are taught about it. So please, throughout this whole process, do not feel like you have dumb questions. Even if you have to ask it again for clarification, it doesn't matter. If your landlord's getting frustrated with you, maybe that's a sign that not so great. So those are some things I wish I would have realized. I didn't realize that other places you have to pay the electricity bill, like gas, heat, whatever. My name ended up being on the utilities bill, and then I had some situations where my roommates weren't paying me their share of the utilities, but it was my name on it, so it was my credit that was going to be affected if it didn't get paid. So those are all things that until you go through these until you're adulting that way, you don't really get it. And so it's really the thing I encourage our prospective tenants to do is really write down a list of all the potential costs you would have. How much is rent? How much is internet? How much is cable if you're going to get it? How much is other utilities? You can go on MG&E online on MG&E or Alliant, and you can look up the address that you're looking at living in and see how much the utilities bills have been. So I would go through and add all those costs up to see what is my actual monthly total going to be, because for most apartments, what you see on the listed price is not what you are paying each month, because it's not including utilities, internet, etc. Like I said, I was spoiled at XO1 because they're one of the few that do include everything, and all you have to do is that one monthly payment and you're done. Not all places are like that. I wish I would have realized that, because I thought I was going to be saving money and I wasn't. So we live and learn, right? I mean, we all make mistakes. You live in a place you don't really think is that great, and it builds some character.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks all for joining me today. Are there any final pieces of advice anyone wanted to throw in there before we sign off today?
I just wanted to add in a little bit more additional information about the housing fair that we're having next week. That'll be Wednesday, like I said, Wednesday, October 21st. That housing fair, it's presented by and hosted by our campus area housing office virtually on our campus area housing website. It's presented by American Families Insurance, LZ Management, so that's XO1 and Grand Central, that Abby is from there, and the James. And just a little bit more background of that, our goal is really for that to be an informative event. Students can learn about the vastly different types of housing that are near our campus area here at UW-Madison. So to be aware of those types of housing, help them just make those informed housing decisions once they have their plan set for fall next year.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you all again for taking the time to talk with me today and share more about resources for off-campus housing. Thank you for our audience for listening, and as always, our Ask Bucky Unfiltered webcast is posted each Sunday on our Campus and Visitor Relations Instagram, YouTube channel, and website. And yeah, thanks again everyone for joining me today.